recording. And then we'll bring up the slides. And the bulk of today's session is about how the media influences people, which will be pages 250 through 255 if you want to do highlighting or note taking in your book. Now, the news media, as we saw on Wednesday, right? Their purposes are to inform, create a public forum or platform for discussion, and then they are to be the watchdog. You can see that in those three purposes, influence is really not a part of them. They're to provide information, and it's supposed to be objective, neutral. Just give us the facts and we'll make up our minds, right? Although we do appreciate updates about hurricanes or tornadoes and things like that. And we do appreciate that they provide an opportunity, especially the social media now, to where we can discuss and debate things. And we certainly want them, because we don't have time. We have jobs and families and lives, and we can't closely monitor everything that's happening at the state capitol in Oklahoma City or the national capital at Washington, D.C. So we want the press to do those things. So in a sense, their role is not to influence, but we know that that's not true. The press does influence people. And so let's talk about the 4 ways, well, the 3 ways that they influence politics as well as the public. The first thing mentioned at the bottom of page 250 is that the media is basically the ones who set the agenda. Another thing to call this is they are the gatekeeper. The gatekeepers, and what are they the gatekeepers of? They are the gatekeepers of information. They set up the agenda. For example, if you watch, like I do, the 5:30 World News, or if you watch a certain broadcast at 6 o'clock or 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock, whenever it is, when they come on the television or on their web channel, they're going to have an agenda already set. And the agenda will be what stories they're going to present. And then what questions they're going to ask people that they interview, whether it's government officials, whether it's political activists, or just the people at the events. And not only does the mass media set the agenda, But people like groups like these interest groups, political parties, individual politicians, bureaucratic agencies, excuse me, political activists, they really depend heavily upon the media. And so they're going to do all that they can to make sure that the media, that they meet the agenda of the media. They have more leeway than the public does. So in a sense, the mass media is setting the agenda themselves, as well as setting the agenda that these groups dictate to them. So that is where they are considered the gatekeepers. This is where it's flawed and can be dangerous. But as you know, the media can be very biased. And so if there is a strong bias, and this starts all the way to the big 6 media companies, or the big 6 companies that own all the media, or 90% of the media. Whoever's running those companies is going to set the agenda, especially the political agenda. Therefore, that's going to affect what the newscasts share and for how long, and what do they focus on. Advertisers also influence the media's role as a gatekeeper. One station in particular that is more to the right let go of some of their journalists because of what they said, and many of the advertisers dropped their support of that station. And then you can have journalists who have personal biases. So the media, they're the gatekeepers, especially the mainstream media today. And this little illustration shows that the media, the mainstream media, has basically, they basically control the information that is released into the public, and they've pretty much encased themselves like in a castle, and outside are the people who want facts and truth. They want the media to be objective. And today, a lot of the people that are basically busting the chops of the mainstream media are bloggers, individual bloggers, YouTube personalities, as well as the growing number of independent social media news platforms. Oh, I forgot to tell you, there is one YouTube personality that I like to watch his. I like to watch his little clips. He puts out about 4 to 5 clips a week, and he is very right leaning, but I do feel like he is reporting things that I'm not going to get from the mainstream media. And if you want to know his name, I'll be glad to tell you if you want to send me an email asking His videos are quite humorous, but also he has a degree in journalism. So he's not just a guy in the basement of his mom's house. He has got a journalism degree, and he writes books that are well researched. And so anyway, keep in mind that the media influences politics and the public by being a gatekeeper. Two other ways that they influence, and you'll find these on pages 254 and 255. And we use these terms framing and priming. The media are framers and the media are primers. Priming is basically a psychological technique in which the media controls how much certain stories are presented. You might have heard the expression priming the pump. This refers to an old water pump in the ground. And before you can pump it to get water out, you have to prime it, usually pour some water on the handle where there's a rubber seal, because if it hasn't been used in a while, the rubber seal will get dry and it will crack and it won't work. So you got to pour the water on the rubber seal, and then you have to start pumping the handle, that is priming it, so that water comes out. In a metaphorical sense, the media will influence people and influence people to react by basically presenting, or using the water analogy, pouring the same story or stories over and over again into people's minds. Framing is basically where the visual content that the media presents is done in a way that will control how you react to it. So, for example, you can see this clip of, I'm not sure if it's one man interviewing another. You can see a little bit of an audience in the background there. Looks like they've got glasses of wine. To me, that looks like a plate of bacon in the background, but you know, I'm a guy. Bacon is like one of the royal foods of life, right? So could this be a cooking show? I doubt it, but anyway, let's just say they're drinking wine. They've got their little headphones on. They've got their audience back there. See that? Let's look at what the clip really looks like, because this is the frame that is presented. Here's what it really looks like. That changes things, doesn't it? Bigger audience. We could zoom in and we could see what's on the screen there. It would help us to have a more complete understanding of what's going on. Let me give you some other examples. Imagine the KKK, that is the Ku Klux Klan, is going to have a rally at the state capitol. And not necessarily our state, but just let's just say at one of the state capitals in the South. One news station, well, I'll tell you what, let's just use our own state and let's just use the different Tulsa stations. Channel 6 in Tulsa, let's say, they do a story on the rally, and they say, they frame it this way: this rally could attract protesters, which could result in violence between the KKK and the protesters. The reporter from Channel 6, who's at Oklahoma City, finds the Oklahoma City police chief and does an interview about how extra security is going to be needed. You can see there that the reporter has framed this story as a public safety issue. But now let's say Channel 8 in Tulsa, they also go down to Oklahoma City. And their reporter is focusing on how the KKK has the right to assemble in public and to share their opinions. For their interview, they do not interview the police chief, but they find, let's say, a University of Oklahoma law professor from Norman. I'll tell you what, let's keep OU and OSU out of this. Let's say a university professor from Oklahoma City University. He's a law professor. And so the interview is about their right to assemble under the protection of the Bill of Rights. So now we have a different channel, Channel 8, framing the story as a freedom of speech issue. So there's one example of framing. One station frames it as a public safety issue. The other channel frames it as a freedom of speech issue. Let's go to another example, this time using pictures. Are you guys familiar with this, this case from a few years ago? I cannot remember this guy's name here on the right, but this is Trayvon Martin. And he was a 15 or 16 years old. He was in a neighborhood that was primarily all white. This guy here, and if somebody would help me out, if you'll Google the Trayvon Martin case and get this guy's name for me, I'd appreciate it. As soon as you get it, just bust in and tell me his name. But this guy here was doing, he was one of the neighborhood watch guys. He ended up shooting Trayvon Martin, and Trayvon Martin died. Now look at this picture. Look at these pictures. And also, along with this guy's name, give me Trayvon's age, please.
It said his name was Zimmerman.
George Zimmerman.
I think so. I don't know the age though.
Yeah, I think it's George Zimmerman. And somebody give me Trayvon's age, please.
He was 17.
17. Okay. So look at George Zimmerman here. He's got kind of a, not a mean look, but not happy. Somehow they got him in an orange shirt, which orange a lot of times is a color associated with criminals, right? They're criminal uniforms. He's fairly light skinned here. Zimmerman, most likely is a European name. Look at Trayvon here, fairly dark, Looks younger than 17, doesn't he? Maybe like he's 13 or 14, smiling. Now look at another way that it's been framed. Zimmerman, his hair is shorter. His facial hair is more goatee-ish like, smiling. Shirt and tie. He was a neighborhood watch guy. Now, this news story probably announced that Zimmerman is Hispanic. He's not European. Trayvon's picture, he looks a little older, not smiling, almost maybe scowling. But notice the two different ways to frame this. I bet we could go back and find the Fox and CNN stories about this. And I would be willing to make a wager that this would more likely have been on CNN and this one on Fox. But what they're doing here is framing. Here's another example of framing. This goes back to before you guys were born, the O.J. Simpson affair. Look at Time Magazine versus Newsweek. Same picture. Newsweek is going to, I'm going to say, lean more to the middle. And the headline, Trail of Blood, I would say would direct people more to saying that the clues, the evidence is a trail that leads back to OJ. Time, and OJ is a little lighter here in this picture. Time, which would be more left-leaning, has a darker negative of the picture, or somehow they've enhanced it to make it darker. You guys can go on to Word, go to Word 10, and you can, if you put a picture on a page, you can go to correction function and you can make them darker or lighter. But anyway, here it's American Tragedy. And it looks to me like Time might be trying to say this African-American man is being basically railroaded and set up, and it's an American tragedy. That's the way I would understand these things. We'd have to ask the editors and the people who put these two together, what were you trying to frame with your covers? I like this comic, an old Mallard Fillmore comic. This is Andrea Mitchell, NBC News. Okay, so we edited some news video to make Mitt Romney say something completely different from what he really said. Give us a break. We're just trying to find our niche. And Fox has that fair and balanced thing sewn up. So framing, choosing how it's the news media choosing how they're going to present a story or details of a story, or even using pictures that people can see visually to affect and influence them. So any questions on that before we look at priming? Again, priming is basically a psychological technique. So it's going to work on a subconscious level. And one of the things that we see in news media and their stories, their reporting, is maybe to show do stories about a certain topic or focus on a certain topic primarily. And right now, especially your mainstream media, ABC, NBC, CBS, and I would say CNN and other left-leaning news groups, they're usually leading off right now with coronavirus, right? Coronavirus and a booster shot and vaccinations. We have been primed for a year and a half about coronavirus. It is usually what leads off the news. Now, last month, when we were withdrawing from Afghanistan, that was the first thing that was reported anyway on ABC. Now, I don't know that we could say it so much in news media, but when it comes to movies and advertisements and other places, you're getting into subliminal messages where they're trying to keep something before you so that it subconsciously influences you. For example, showing not necessarily the news, but some other kind of organization or agency showing pictures of older citizens often so that it would cause people to walk more slowly. Look at this one test. When a picture of a woman appeared on a math test, female students were reminded to recall their gender and they performed worse on the test. That was a study back in 1999. So they were priming. What has been on the news every night since January 6th? Some kind of report about the protesters who went to the Capitol on January 6th. And they wanted to, well, they were camped out in Washington, D.C., and then they wanted to influence Vice President Pence at the time to toss out some electoral votes so that Trump would get reelected. And you guys know that a large group of them stormed into the Capitol. But that is on every night on world news. January 6th is brought up, and the angle is usually the violent protesters, the sometimes it's called a terrorist attack, but that has been something that's been primed since January 6th. So let's take these three things and compare them on how they affect people. And we can see a little bit how they differ. Agenda setting would deal with the amount of news coverage. When we talk about the amount, we're going to talk about how many stories are covered and how much time they get. Priming is going to be changes in the number of stories about an issue. So for example, right now, the Haitian migrants that are at the Del Rio border crossing. A lot of times there's a story about the migrants themselves and what's happening. And then there's a story right after it about what the Biden administration is doing. So the number of stories about an issue. Likewise, with COVID, you get a story about how many people came down with COVID today, or how many new cases, how many people died. And then a story about the booster shot, or how many people have had a vaccine. And then maybe another story about a new variant like the Delta variant. So the number of stories, that's priming. And then framing is changes in the content of a story. What facts or details will be shared, or again, what pictures will be shown. All right, I'm going to stop there, and we've just got like 2 pages left, so we'll finish that first thing on Monday morning. But any questions about how the excuse me, how the media influences us? All right, well, have a great weekend. If you do want to share what news outlet you get your news from, just shoot me an email. And if you want to know who that YouTube personality is that I watch quite often, I'll be glad to tell you. Again, shoot me an email. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you on Monday. I'll stick
See ya.
around if there's any questions.